Hi friends, I'm Les Mood, your host. Welcome to Green Tech Network. Today we're at Kern Community College in Bakersfield. We're launching the Destination for Innovation campaign with the City of Bakersfield. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Jessica Grimes. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you, glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Jessica, I have a question. When I met you, I was really taken aback. I was so amazed to hear you speak at an event. So I'm glad you're here. Can you share something with us that maybe people don't know about you, maybe your associates or the community, a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I think people don't know that I come from quite a tribe. I'm one of 11 children and from the same mom and dad. I am the 10th child, but the way that it breaks down is that there's 9 girls and 2 boys. So I'm the 9th daughter and the 10th child. And I'm from Akron, Ohio.
Wow, yeah. So you moved here when you were 3, right?
I moved here when I was 3 years old.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you're here in Bakersfield, and we are doing this for Bakersfield, so it's great to talk about that. I wonder where, your journey began. You've come so far, and before we continue, can you tell me your actual title? Because it's kind of like a tongue twister.
Sure. So I'm Associate Vice Chancellor of Career Education and Workforce Development, which includes being Regional Chair of the Central Valley Motherlode Regional Consortium, and that has 15 colleges and hundreds of local education agencies that we work with for the Strong Workforce Program grant. So I know that kind of doesn't roll off the tongue, but that's what I do here.
It seems to be the case with education and government that those acronyms come in pretty handy.
Yes.
So where did your journey begin in your career?
Wow, that's a great question. So when my undergrad, I went to University of the Pacific and I majored in English, religious studies, minor pre-law. That's something that people don't know about me. And I just had a great experience with an English professor, and voila, that's when I decided to teach English at a community college. And so that was pretty much my career aspiration. I wanted to be an English professor, and I taught at Taft College for 10 years in that capacity. Loved it. I still miss being in the classroom. And then I had this opportunity that came up to be in an interim role as an administrator. It was the title was Dean of Instruction in CTE, and that happened about 4 years ago. And as the story goes, I haven't looked back. I felt like it was just a perfect fit for me. I love having the ability to advocate at a higher level and to affect change for students who really rely on us. At the community college, we accept the top 100%, and I love that democratic approach to education, so yeah.
Yeah, so on that note, you kind of touched on some of what you're doing today, but your story, your journey from, being an English teacher and so forth to what you're doing today, what are you doing these days? What does it look like today?
So these days, I'm really excited to move the needle in workforce training and economic development. And those are just like, to me, 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have economic development without workforce training. And there are 2 avenues that I do that. Here in Kern County, we have the Community Economic Resilience Fund, and we're in 2 stages. One, we're standing up what it's going to look like to have inclusive economic development. That means we're having a lot of different people at the table figure out what type of good quality jobs need to be here in Kern County in order to lift people out of generational poverty. So I'm very, very excited about those conversations. And so that's about an infrastructure, but it's also about proposals that we need to move forward, that we can get state funding, federal funding, even private funding. What does that look like for Kern County? And then on a regional level, it's a similar approach. Regionally in the Central Valley Motherlode, we're also looking at workforce training, and we're thinking about equity in the same way that CERF examines it. And so in 3 different areas. Economic, of course, we want good quality jobs for folks who have been underrepresented in the space, but we're also looking at jobs that provide social mobility, health benefits, and that don't have a negative environmental impact. So if we are bringing industries here, are we being strategic about it? And then there's always the health equity piece where people have access to good health care and just live a good life. So I'm excited because I think it's a holistic approach.
I love that, the holistic approach. And in the journey, there's struggles and challenges that everyone goes through. Do you have some struggles or kind of, triumphs associated with those struggles that you could share with us from your journey?
Sure. So I will say that you look at me and you might not realize that I do a lot of things scared. So most of what I've done in especially my professional career, I've struggled with imposter syndrome. I haven't felt like I belonged at the table, and people will always kind of say in a sort of like half joking way, just grab a seat and come to the table. Well, not all of us sort of move and navigate that way. I have to do a lot of self-talk about belonging, and I think that's really important because sometimes we don't try things because we will be the first people to self-sabotage and put a ceiling on our potential. So that's one thing. And then I've had moments where, I think sometimes unwittingly and maybe not so unwittingly, there have been people who have made me feel like I didn't belong. And how does one, persevere, remain resilient? And it's very, very important to me to maintain my internal weather and to show up authentically, show up as a person who wants to work with others. That's very, very important. And I think those experiences have made me the person I am today. I'm not saying I have arrived. I'm always learning and growing. And so, I don't know if that's what you were looking for. But
Absolutely. Well, I find parallels between what you're doing and being a creator, content creator, and I think courage is one of them.
Yeah.
And just as you had described, you have some advice that you would like to share with the green tech community and our community here?
Well, this is going to sound maybe trite, but I really mean it. And that is, don't give up. I know that we are in this, what I consider to be an exciting phase of just the evolution of society. And that requires some tension, because social change always requires tension. But I think we have to have deep, meaningful conversations and have ground rules, if you will, about respecting one another, hearing one another, but also having the goal of progressing together. I call it mutual growth and mutual understanding. I think that's possible. I'm a bit of an optimist. And so I think that only happens, though, when we all show up willing to learn and grow with each other. And I know that might kind of sound like a kumbaya, but one of the things that I imagine for our society moving forward, like I think, we're trying to do a lot of brave things in this space, is how to work together differently to accomplish greater things. So that means that we kind of have to change the rules, pivot a little, figure out who's not at the table. I'm trying not to speak too much. I'm going a little on and on there.
No problem.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of kumbaya, right, we're going to have this thought experiment. And so for the next part, it's really about casting away all doubts and uncertainty and all the challenges and roadblocks that we have in front of us and thinking, what are the possibilities, right? So you ready?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So the first question is easy. It's like, what is some of the low-hanging fruit that, our community or in general, people out there who want to make a difference can do and really bite into?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Community Economic Resilience Fund. I'm super excited that we're going to have I like to call it a roadshow. We're going to have community engagement meetings at the end of this month where we talk about CERF and we talk about the CERF Catalyst funding that's coming down the pipeline. And we are soliciting ideas about what does this look like for Kern County. CERF is a platform, if you will, for economic development and workforce training. And we're looking for ideas from everybody. So that's like low-hanging fruit right there. And then I'm just thinking about, there's a lot of different things happening in terms of volunteerism. I think that really helps because those ideas need to be sourced not only from our personal experiences, but also interacting with other people and seeing where the needs are to figure out what needs to percolate to the surface that benefits most of us. You can go to the website. It's the Kern Coalition CERF website, and you can learn more about that. But it shows you where our meetings are and also how to submit feedback and ideas.
Absolutely. Well, I think it may be low-hanging fruit, but it's a really great big initiative.
Yeah.
And speaking of big things, what are some of the bigger challenges, or what are some of the things that we shouldn't ignore in our desires we're trying to move forward and diversify the economy?
I'm glad you asked that question because I do think about that. I wouldn't say that it always keeps me up at night, but we need to think about navigation. And what I mean by that is when we talk about these grandiose ideas like good quality jobs, there are real people who have to be convinced that they want to get these good quality jobs. In other words, there is this issue where the jobs are out there and then where's the workforce? So we need to be thinking about the people. How do they navigate the different systems and removing those barriers? So I'm thinking about, if I'm someone who is in an industry that may be going away, what is it that I need to have in place in order for me to feel supported so that I decide to upskill or reskill? Those types of things, like how do we navigate, how do we make workforce training accessible for adult learners? So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is what everybody's talking about, and that is, if we're talking about community, how do we reimagine it to where it's inclusive of everyone? And when I mean everyone, I mean people make mistakes. How do they re-engage? How do we have on-ramps that are accessible for people who are maybe unsheltered, unhoused? How do we get them involved in this space as well?
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate it. And you mentioned community. And I'm curious, with being such an active person in the community, what you think the role of community plays in making the world a better place.
Wow, that is a fantastic question. I think community is underrated, and it's this big, huge term that is very difficult to corral into a definition. So the biggest thing is, I think, belonging, having spaces that are free where people can actually come together and benefit from socialization, benefit from sharing ideas. Right now, we live in a society where that's very difficult. And then even now, I'm thinking of the free spaces, right? And they're usually outdoor spaces. That isn't necessarily, doesn't work for sensitive groups. So when I think of community, I think of how do we create neighborhoods and enclaves? People talk about community gardens. There's lots of different places where we want to be able to interact in a way where we see each other as neighbors and not necessarily as people that we don't want to interact with. I think that's the first thing. The pandemic helped us sort of pivot, and I think we're still redefining what that looks like for us. But to me, community also means giving back. It means like, I'm not just this individual. And I think we sometimes struggle with that because the American dream is more individualistic, but in order for us to move forward together as a collective, we have to actually take more people with us. And how do we create opportunities for them to be able to do that? I think opportunities for volunteerism is really, really important. We have to make that accessible. And I think also having like this sort of, I don't know, just this collective sense of when other people win, I win. I call that the abundance mentality. We can actually, I know that people talk about, it's a competition and all that, and that may be true, but that doesn't mean that we have to be exclusive. So I think community gives us this opportunity to kind of reframe the way in which we approach economic development, particularly. So
absolutely. Well, that's why I wanted to have you on to share that tidbit there about community, and with all the work you're doing and that you'll continue to do, when the dust settles, when you leave the world, what would you like to leave behind, or what would you like to see happen?
Wow. Okay. So at this moment, what I would love to leave behind is a more nimble system for people who, let's say I'm recently heard that I'm going to be evicted, for that person to be able to navigate the system and get into housing quicker, get into opportunities for a job quicker. And what I mean by that, where it's not necessarily weeks. I know that everyone wants that to actually happen, but figure out what do we need to do to be able to bring the opportunities to those people who actually need them. Because I think that's connected to what I said earlier. When we talk about unhoused people, the system needs to work for everyone. So for me, I think that requires us to really take a look at how the people navigate the system and figure out ways to make it easier for them to do that. And that's more of a mapping. It's creating a roadmap. I call it pathways to prosperity, but people call it a lot of different things. If I could create that, like a template, I would think I've done what I was supposed to do. And then with measurable success. And what I mean by that is where we were able to track, to say, we started off with this percent and then now we've like multiplied that. That to me is what success looks like, because, when I think about, the generations coming behind, I don't want it to be where we're reproducing the same inequities and barriers. I want it to be where they're dissolving because we're thinking differently. We're being a little more innovative and creative.
Absolutely. Well, that's why we're here. We're talking about, Bakersfield is a destination for innovation, and that's why you're on the show. And, I'm really curious as well. The last question really is, what, do you think a just and equitable energy transition or transformation in general is possible? And if so, how?
Well, I'm going to say yes, because like I said, I'm a really positive person, but I'm going to say with the caveat that it will take time. One thing that I think is really important is what you're doing. Community education, I think, is really important. One of the reasons why social change is hard is that people get left behind. They don't necessarily know what's actually happening. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just really mean where the information is just not readily available, or it's not accessible in that I can understand it. The average person who's just like, hey, what does this all mean? I'm not in energy, So I think yes, but I also think there needs to be a lot of work on what does it look like for the daily interactions. Like, for example, there's so the American dream sort of advances this idea that bigger is always better. And so that means that the consumption of energy looks a little bit differently. I think there needs to be education around just that microcosm look of the daily household. What does it look like? And how can we be a little bit more circumspect, maybe strategic about that? But then on the macro, it's more of it providing incentives, working with obviously those who are producing, renewables, but also making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. I mean, it's this whole comprehensive ecosystem that is obviously not going to happen overnight. And I think it really is addressing the fears too, because I think about, at any given time, society is evolving. We're not in the horse and carriage, and at one point we were. So that transition happened, and there were some people who were left behind. What can we learn from that, and how can we do this in a way that is inclusive and fair? I think we have to, have those tough conversations and invite people to the table and be willing to adjust and pivot as needed.
Absolutely. So it's going to take time,
Yes.
tough conversations. Yeah, I really appreciate the time you've taken today as it is, and I really appreciate your view of community and your unique experience of what you're doing in the community. So is there anything you'd like to add, or where can people find you? Where do you like to,
Oh, wow.
I'm a little biased towards LinkedIn, but
Yeah.
you're
I
on
do
Facebook
have a
as well.
LinkedIn profile. I know. Social media and I try. And I also have a Facebook. Yeah. And that's all. That's my speed. That's my speed. So, they can find me on there.
Absolutely. Well, I encourage everyone to connect with Jessica. That's why we're here, for everyone to connect, collaborate, and create new possibilities together. So thank you all for tuning in to Green Tech Network and the Destination for Innovation. We're going to have more guests like Jessica on from the local community, state, and national people. So stay tuned. We'll see you next week.